Chapter 176. Choose. Su Shimin and the rest of the family Su looked at each other and felt their heartbeat accelerate. They knew very well that the decision they made next would determine their lives. I choose cultivation. Su Shimin thought for a while and said seriously. Before the family Su became the imperial family, they were a martial arts family, and Su Shimin was the backbone of the family Su. It can be said that among the people present, Su Shimin's pursuit of martial arts was the most devout. I also want to cultivate. The two brothers Su Sungho and Su Qinyu also said in unison. What about you? Su Qin turned his gaze and looked at the Emperor of Tang and Su Yun. Third brother, can you wait for me for 20 years? I want to wait until everything in the Empire of Tang is settled and the throne is passed to Yuan before I can cultivate. The Emperor of Tang was still worried about the Empire of Tang and asked in a low voice. Yes. Su Qin nodded. 20 years later, the Emperor of Tang will be in his 60s. If it was someone else, they would have missed the age to cultivate martial arts, but for Su Qin, it is just a matter of a drop of E-wood spirit liquid. E-wood spirit liquid is powerful. Although it has no effect on Su Qin, in the eyes of ordinary people and even grade 1 great grandmasters, it is definitely a well-deserved holy medicine. Third brother, I want to accompany His Majesty. Su Yueyun looked at the Emperor of Tang and asked carefully. Su Qin, of course, has no objection. Unlike others, Su Yueyun has absorbed a drop of E-wood spirit liquid early. Let the alone 20 years, even 40 years is more than enough. Since you all choose to cultivate, then I will emphasize one more thing. Su Qin glanced at the crowd and continued. Even if the heavens and earth change, it will be extremely difficult for you to enter the legend realm. It can only be said that there is a glimmer of hope, but whether this hope can be realized or not depends on you. Su Qin said while shaking his head. After grade 1 great perfection, if you want to go further, you need to grasp a wisp of qi between the heavens and earth. Although the world's vitality recovery has increased the amount of qi, it still depends on luck to grasp it smoothly. I can't help you. What Su Qin said is true. Before the recovery of vitality, only 1 out of 200 grade 1 great perfections could become a martial arts legend. Now, 1 out of 100 grade 1 great perfections will be a martial arts legend. It seems that the chances have doubled, but in fact, what is the concept of 100 grade 1 great perfection? One must know that before the imperial teacher of the Meng Yuan Empire, no legend had been born for 200 years. Even the imperial dynasty's imperial teacher took the final step with the help of the vitality recovery. If there is no vitality recovery, the imperial teacher will be trapped in grade 1. After Su Qin finished speaking, he looked at the reaction of the family Su. It's not that he wants to hurt them, but he doesn't want to see the family Su full of hope only to face despair. Su Shimin and the others looked at each other. After hearing Su Qin's words, they quickly calmed down. They know how difficult it is to enter the legend realm. Even if they use the heavens and earth, coupled with Su Qin's help, it is estimated that their hope is slim. However, after discussing for a long time, they decided to go all out. There is no other way. Becoming a legend is too tempting. Not to mention other things, just the 500 years of Shouyuan is enough to make everyone desperate. Next, seeing that everyone has made up their minds, Su Qin began to teach them some cultivation techniques. These cultivation techniques were obtained by Su Qin in the past few decades. They are not divine secret arts, but they are definitely the most suitable cultivation techniques for the family Su. As for the real divine secret arts, even if Su Qin wants to teach them, the family Su can't learn it. For example, Su Qin is currently cultivating the past Amitabha Sutra. Even if he gave the original to the family Su on the spot, what can they do? Can they understand it? For thousands of years, no one has been able to learn the past Amitabha Sutra, let alone people outside Buddhism. Even Su Qin understood the past Amitabha Sutra because of the system's infusion. The stronger the cultivation technique is, the better it is. Okay. Come with me to a place. When Su Qin saw that everyone had calmed down, he spoke and turned to leave. The Emperor of Tang and the others immediately got up and followed behind Su Qin. Su Qin led everyone to the right spring square of the East Palace. Ask all the eunuchs and palace maids in the East Palace to leave. Su Qin stopped and looked at the Emperor of Tang and said. The Emperor of Tang heard this and immediately gave the order. Suddenly, except for the few of them, there was no one else in the East Palace. Third brother, isn't this your residence? Su Yueyun asked curiously. Residence? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. He raised his right hand and pointed to the right spring square. Look again, is this still my residence? As soon as Su Qin's voice fell, the entire right spring square suddenly roared. Clouds and mist curled up and spread rapidly. In a short while, it enveloped the entire East Palace. Countless heaven and earth great arrays continued to overlap. Within the range of the great array, the aura was surging and vitality was like rain. It was like a paradise on earth. This is? Su Yuan, Su Sungho, and Su Qingyu had never seen such an incredible scene. They all exclaimed. Even Su Shimin of the Lao Dao had a look of deep shock on his face. They did not expect that Su Qin, with a wave of his hand, would transform the Eastern Palace into a paradise on earth, as if a god of creation had changed the world. Heaven and Earth Great Array. This is the Heaven and Earth Great Array that the great ancestor mentioned. The Emperor of Tang was extremely shocked and muttered to himself. Before the great ancestor crossed the sea, he had left a Heaven and Earth Great Array in the Imperial Palace. But after 500 years, the Heaven and Earth Great Array had long disappeared. Moreover, according to the words left by the great ancestor, even if the Heaven and Earth Great Array in the Empire of Tang was still there, it was far inferior to the Heaven and Earth Great Array in the East Palace. If you want to cultivate in the future, you can come here. Su Qin smiled slightly. Ever since he discovered the majestic hall under Chang and city, Su Qin had basically ignored the right spring square. He would only come here for a stroll when he was free. Since that was the case, he might as well let the family Su use it. Not good. I should have the Forbidden Army stand guard outside. Otherwise, if someone else breaks in, at this moment, the Emperor of Tang's expression changed slightly. Don't worry. No one can come in without my permission. Su Qin said indifferently. The Heaven and Earth Great Array that he had set up in the right spring square was to prevent others from entering by mistake. Although he added other Heaven and Earth Great Arrays later, such as Gathering World Essence Qi, the original Heaven and Earth Great Array still existed. With these Heaven and Earth Great Arrays guarding, even a martial arts legend would be trapped for a moment if they broke in, let alone others. After Su Qin gave a few more instructions, the family Su happily followed Su Qin's instructions to cultivate. After everyone was busy, Su Qin's smile gradually faded. It's time to think about how to condense the miniature domain. Chapter 177. Cave World. The sky was dark. Su Qin was sitting cross-legged under a withered ancient tree. Next to Su Qin, Mohim was standing very obediently. Master, it is rumored that in the deepest part of the world, there is an ancient demon tree. It is this ancient demon tree that supports the entire world. The demon gods are sitting on the ancient demon tree. Mohim tried her best to tell everything she knew truthfully. Ancient demon tree. Su Qin raised his eyebrows and looked at Mohim. Yes, master. Mohim bit her lips and said charmingly, I also heard that in the Demon Cloud City, there is a branch of the ancient demon tree. If master is curious, you might as well go to the Demon Cloud City to take a look. Is that so? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face, and a black light appeared in the depths of his pupils. Suddenly, Mohim's tender body trembled, and her pretty face became pale as paper. She knelt at Su Qin's feet with a plop. Master, I know I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Mohim's voice trembled as if she was experiencing terrible torture. Tell me, what is your relationship with the Demon Cloud City? Why do you know so much about the Demon Cloud City? Su Qin looked at Mohim with a smile and said lightly. With Su Qin's perception, he naturally noticed that there was some kind of connection between Mohim and the Demon Cloud City. Compared with ordinary demons, Mohim knew too much. She even knew about the world's vitality tide. Master, I'll tell you everything. Mohim's pretty face flashed a trace of struggle, and then she immediately begged for mercy. Say it. Su Qin said casually. Mohim's complexion recovered slightly, and she said respectfully, Master, the Demon Cloud City Lord is my granduncle. Granduncle? Su Qin was slightly surprised. He thought that Mohim had a grudge against the Demon Cloud City Lord. After all, Su Qin could feel Mohim's hatred for the City Lord hidden deep in his heart. Master, although the Demon Cloud City Master is my granduncle, I can't wait for him to die. When Emoji said this, she paused for a moment before continuing, I was born with a pure Yin body. When my granduncle found out, not only did he imprison me, he even planned to give me to another demon king as a cultivation vessel. Furnace. Su Qin looked pensive. If Mohim really became another demon king's cauldron, his fate would be extremely miserable. If he was lucky, the pure Yin qi in his body would be sucked dry, and his qi and blood would be destroyed. He would only last for a few dozen days before dying. If he was lucky, his soul would scatter on the spot. It can be said that the Demon Cloud City Lord giving Mohim to the other demon kings as a cultivation cauldron was equivalent to letting Mohim die, and an extremely miserable death at that. And then? Su Qin continued to ask. Then I escaped. But it didn't take long for me to be discovered. Then I was rescued by Master. Mohim did not dare to lie, and said with a trembling voice. She knew very well that apart from Su Qin, she had no one to rely on. Without Su Qin's protection, she would fall into the hands of the City Lord sooner or later, and then be treated as a cultivation cauldron, like a commodity. Through this time of getting along, Mohim knew that although Su Qin was cold, he didn't seem to be interested in her, let alone treat her as a cultivation cauldron. After discovering this, Mohim immediately became determined to follow Su Qin. One must know that the pure Yin qi in her body was very beneficial to king-level existences. Any demon king who discovers her will not let her go. It was simply a stroke of luck to meet Su Qin, a demon king who didn't care about her pure Yin body. I see. You can leave now. Su Qin waved his hand and said. Mohim left obediently. Su Qin watched Mohim leave. He didn't think that she was lying just now. One must know that when Emoji spoke, her hatred for the City Lord was real. Coupled with Su Qin's divine sense, he was even more certain that Mohim was telling the truth. In the past few years, I've visited all the nearby places where I can sign in. Only the Demon Cloud City is left. Su Qin touched his chin, his thoughts fluctuating. Even without Mohim, Su Qin would go to the Demon Cloud City. After all, the Demon Cloud City has existed for the longest time. In terms of Dao accumulation, the Demon Cloud City definitely has the most Dao accumulation. And the more Dao accumulation, the better the treasures Su Qin will get. However, before going to the Demon Cloud City, I should make a breakthrough first. Su Qin's expression slightly condensed. As early as when Su Qin's main body broke through to the 7th heavenly layer, this incarnation could also break through. After all, whether it was the main body or the incarnation, they were both Su Qin, sharing the same will and thoughts. Let's start. Su Qin slowly closed his eyes, and the aura in his body was circulating endlessly. A few days later, Emoji was bored to death as she swung on the swing, her snow-white long legs swinging back and forth. Master hasn't called me for several days. Mohim blinked her big eyes, constantly looking at the valley where Su Qin was. Unfortunately, at this moment, the valley was covered by a layer of demonic qi. Even if Mohim looked for 100 years, she wouldn't be able to see anything clearly. Master won't be angry, right? I really didn't mean to hide it from Master. Mohim's heart tightened, thinking that Su Qin blamed her for hiding her relationship with the Demon Cloud City from him. No. I must explain it to Master. Mohim jumped down from the swing and was about to run out of the valley to see Su Qin. However, at this moment, a faint voice came. What do you want to explain? Mohim looked up and saw a man standing there quietly. Master! Mohim exclaimed, looking at Su Qin in disbelief. At this moment, Su Qin gave Mohim a completely different feeling. It was like a real endless abyss, constantly devouring everything around him, and even Mohim's eyes couldn't escape. You broke through. Mohim's pretty face was full of shock. Although Mohim was not a demon king, she had stayed in the demon cloud city for a long time. Although the city lord imprisoned her, he didn't mind telling her some things. Among them was the breakthrough of the demon king level. Every step taken by a demon king level existence was extremely difficult, and it took years or even decades for them to retreat. But Su Qin only went into retreat for a few days, and he broke through? Breakthrough? Sort of. Su Qin said casually. At this moment, he had completely entered the seventh heavenly layer. His aura was vast and mighty. Even in the cave world, he was definitely a powerhouse, a peak demon king who suppressed several major cities. Let's go. Su Qin looked up at the sky and said, Go. Master, where are we going? When Mohim heard this, she immediately followed Su Qin and asked in a low voice, Where are we going? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face, and he said lightly, Demon Cloud City. Chapter 178. Chang'an City. In a majestic underground palace. Su Qin sat cross-legged. His aura was deep and profound, as if the vast void encompassed everything. After stepping into the seventh heaven, my control of the power of heaven and earth has skyrocketed to 100 miles. Su Qin carefully felt his body and whispered to himself. At this moment, he could mobilize the vitality of heaven and earth within 100 miles with a thought. He was like a real immortal, representing the might of heaven. Although the power has increased a lot, I can feel that the power of heaven and earth within 100 miles is already the limit. In other words, the power of heaven and earth within 100 miles is the limit of Venerable Arhat, a martial arts legend. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Compared to the true vastness of heaven and earth, the power of an individual was obviously insignificant. Even Venerable Arhat, a martial arts legend, was no exception. For any martial arts legend, Venerable Arhat, the range that he could wield with ease was 100 miles. Once it exceeded 100 miles, even a martial arts legend of the ninth heaven would not be able to do it. Of course, Su Qin used the 9 Yaobao to kill 10 vassals from thousands of miles away. It was the power of the 9 Yaobao, and it was not his own control of the power of heaven and earth. No wonder after the seventh heaven, I have to start condensing the micro-domain. It turns out that my control of the power of heaven and earth has reached the limit. Su Qin nodded slightly. Since he could no longer continue to expand the range of the power of heaven and earth, what should he do? Of course, it was to infinitely compress and condense the power of heaven and earth to form something similar to a domain. It is said that if a martial arts legend wants to go one step further and enter the realm of earth immortals, he has to constantly perfect the micro-domain and form a real domain. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. A real earth immortal can envelop heaven and earth with a thought. Within the domain, the earth immortal is the only God, omnipotent. Su Qin was fascinated. However, if I want to condense the micro-domain, the first thing I have to do is to thoroughly familiarize myself with the power of the seventh heaven, and then use a lot of effort to slowly compress the power of heaven and earth. Finally, if I want to condense the power of heaven and earth to form the micro-domain, I will need to inject a lot of divine thoughts. Su Qin sighed softly. Su Qin didn't care much about his divine sense. After the moon-forging divine sense art had forged it, his divine sense was extremely stable, completely meeting the requirements to form a miniature domain. But compressing heaven and earth power required Su Qin to do it bit by bit. There was no shortcut. This was also the reason why many 7th Celestial Stage experts were unable to grasp a miniature domain. Condensing a miniature domain took too much time. Even a martial arts legend could only be a shoyuan for 500 years. If he were to spend a few hundred years to condense a micro-domain, how could he still cultivate? Let's give it a try. Su Qin couldn't think of anything for the time being, so he could only try to compress the heaven and earth power. Just as Su Qin was slowly compressing the power of heaven and earth, the the 1,000-year Bodhi heart that Su Qin had been wearing suddenly emitted a faint brilliance. Under the glow of this misty light, Su Qin's speed of compressing the natural powers suddenly soared, reaching tens of times, even hundreds of times faster than normal. This is... Su Qin suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the 1,000-year Bodhi heart in front of him. All this time, Su Qin thought that the 1,000-year Bodhi heart's function was to see one's true nature, stabilize one's mind, and prevent one from going mad. But at this moment, when compressing the power of heaven and earth, the 1,000-year Bodhi heart actually had such a stimulating effect. According to the Buddhist scriptures, the 1,000-year Bodhi heart grows in the Buddha's pure land, and the Buddha's pure land should be similar to a domain. Su Qin's thoughts raced as he thought silently. For a seventh heaven martial arts legend, what was condensed was a domain, but for a seventh heaven venerable arhat, what was condensed was a pure land. Although domain and pure land were called different names, they were essentially the same. At this speed, an ordinary martial arts legend would need at least 200 or 300 years to condense a domain, but for me, 2 or 3 years is enough. Su Qin was amazed as he kept looking at the 1,000-year Bodhi heart in front of him. Not bad. Not bad. Su Qin's face was full of joy. Although he had enough shouyuan, and even if it really took 200 or 300 years to condense a domain, if he could save time, why wouldn't he save time? In the following time, Su Qin basically spent all his time condensing a miniature domain. With the help of the 1,000-year Bodhi heart, Su Qin's path of condensing a miniature domain was simply 1,000 miles a day. On this day, Su Qin had just finished a period of cultivation and left the majestic hall, ready to stroll around. Martial arts cultivation was a step-by-step process. Unless he had a breakthrough, Su Qin generally wouldn't fall into seclusion for a long time. The vitality tide has risen a little again. Su Qin felt the heaven and earth, and his thoughts fluctuated. It just so happens that I haven't signed in today. Let's sign in at the palace today. When Su Qin passed by the white jade square, he suddenly stopped and made a decision in his heart. Ever since he sent his incarnation to the cave world, most of his daily sign-in opportunities were used in the cave world, but occasionally, Su Qin would sign in at the palace on a whim. System, sign in. Su Qin stood in front of the white jade square and muttered in his heart, "Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have obtained the Burning Blood technique." Burning Blood technique? All kinds of insights about the Burning Blood technique suddenly appeared in Su Qin's mind. So it's a desperate forbidden technique that burns one's own flesh and blood to obtain a substantial increase in strength. Su Qin's eyes lit up. The price of using the Burning Blood technique is to burn one's own flesh and blood. For any warrior, this was a heavy price to pay. But in Su Qin's eyes, it was no different from nothing. Because Su Qin has the flesh rebirth ability. With the blessing of this ability, even if Su Qin keeps using the Burning Blood technique, he can quickly recover, which is equivalent to not having to pay any price. Another trump card. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. At the same time, tens of thousands of miles away from the Tang dynasty, at the edge of the continent near the ocean, a figure in a blue robe stepped on the waves and came towards the continent at a terrifying speed. If the imperial teacher was still alive and was here, he would have noticed that this man in a blue robe had a mighty aura, indicating that he was a legend. And he wasn't even a legend who had just entered the first heavenly layer. So, the man in the blue robe approached the edge of the continent. Here, this is the place where the Tianji sect's Tianji child spent 100 years of Shouyuan's prophecy. The blue-robed man muttered to himself, "The vitality tide is recovering, and the great world is coming." But in the great world, there are also those who are close and those who are distant. And the place of the great battle is the core of the vitality tide. In the land of the great era, there will be an earth immortal, or even an existence that surpasses the earth immortal. The man in the blue robe's heart was burning. Chapter 179. At the edge of the continent, a man in a blue robe had a fiery gaze. The overseas martial arts were unprecedentedly prosperous, but most of the cultivation resources were controlled by the major sections. Ordinary martial artists, even if they were at the mythical level, would be in a difficult situation if they did not choose to join a major sect and work hard for it. Those sect masters are unwilling to believe the prophecy of Xianxia. They think that even if the vitality tide recovers, the overseas will still maintain its past glory. What a pity! The man in the blue robe shook his head slightly, and a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He once obtained an opportunity on a deserted island and knew that this was not the first time the vitality tide had appeared. As early as tens of thousands of years ago, the vitality tide had risen and fallen. And every time the vitality tide soared, a certain core area would appear. This core area would be above all other places in the world, and even the extremely prosperous overseas would be suppressed. However, those sect masters don't believe it, but for me, it saves me some trouble. A smile appeared on the face of the man in the blue robe. If the major sects overseas believed the prophecy of Xianxia, he would have a headache. But now, no one cared about this continent, and in the eyes of the man in the blue robe, it was a great thing. As long as I occupy this continent in advance and start to make arrangements, even if it's only for a few years, the benefits will be better than decades or hundreds of years of hard work. The man in the blue robe's thoughts turned quickly, and he began to think about how to suppress this continent as soon as possible. If in decades or hundreds of years, this continent was completely full of vitality, he naturally would not dare to have such thoughts. But now, even if it was the core area of the recovery of vitality tide, it still needed time to accumulate and settle. Today's continent, even if it showed some extraordinary aspects, but in his eyes, it was just so. As an overseas mythical martial artist, the man in the blue robe naturally had his own pride. In this remote place far away from the overseas, a martial arts legend would not be born in hundreds of years. How could it resist his suppression? The only thing the man in the blue robe needed to consider now was how to suppress this continent as soon as possible. I have to hurry. In a short time, the major sects may not believe the prophecy of Xianxia, but as time goes by, the vitality tide will become more and more intense, and those sect masters who stand at the top of the overseas will inevitably notice one or two. The man in the blue robe's heart suddenly tightened. He had never thought that he could monopolize this continent forever. Once those sect masters overseas reacted, the blue-robed man would have no choice but to retreat. Thinking of this, the blue-robed man took a step forward and disappeared. Meanwhile, Su Qin strolled leisurely in the palace. Su Qin stopped and looked into the ancestral shrine of the imperial palace. When Su Qin first arrived at the imperial palace, he knew that the guardian of the ancestral temple was a peak grade 1. He should be the last hidden treasure of the Emperor of Tang. Am I going to die? Su Qin's eyes were calm as his thoughts fluctuated. In his perception, the temple keeper's life force was like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any moment. Shouyuan's time limit. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Even for a 7th heavenly venerable like Su Qin, Shouyuan's time limit is an unavoidable problem. If Su Qin can't enter the great Arhat realm in the future, he can only live for more than 950 years, and then wait until his vitality declines and he dies of old age alone. It's a pity. Su Qin sighed softly in his heart. Now that the vitality tide is recovering, if the temple keeper still has a few decades of Shouyuan, it is not impossible to try to take that step. But now, just as Su Qin was about to turn around and leave, the door of the ancestral temple was slowly pushed open. The temple keeper walked out of the ancestral temple with difficulty. The moment he saw Su Qin, his expression changed slightly, and then he respectfully said, "Greetings, sir." Although the temple keeper's vitality is declining at this moment, and he is close to Shouyuan's time limit, as a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, unless he really dies of old age, it is impossible for him to be unable to move. What is your relationship with the founding father of the Empire of Tang? Su Qin stopped, looked at the temple keeper again, and asked casually. Although Su Qin has never seen the founding father of the Empire of Tang, he has obtained the jade pendant left by the founding father of the Empire of Tang to store his divine sense. In his divine sense, the aura of the founding father of the Empire of Tang is slightly similar to that of the temple keeper at this moment. Therefore, Su Qin asked this question. Sir, the founding father is the founder of my lineage. The temple keeper respectfully said. So that's how it is. Su Qin nodded slightly. In this way, everything made sense now. Sir. Before the founding father crossed the sea, he left a message that if a new legend is born in the empire of Tang in the future, he must tell him some things truthfully. The temple keeper hesitated for a while and said in a low voice. Su Qin looked at the temple keeper and said lightly, Tell me, what is the founding father of the empire of Tang referring to? Sir, the founding father once said that although there is a chance of longevity overseas, it is not a good place. Overseas is full of vitality and spiritual opportunity. It is a cultivation holy land for legends, but overseas is also occupied by the major sects and controls countless resources. The temple keeper said truthfully. I see. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Overseas is not a good place. Su Qin knew it when he met the beautiful figure in the palace dress when he was in Nanzhao and controlled moon worship. But Su Qin heard of the major sects for the first time. Sir, if you are going overseas, you must be careful. The temple keeper was silent for a while and continued. Hearing this, Su Qin just smiled and did not reply. For other legends and venerable Arhat, overseas is the only place they can go. Only overseas can they find further opportunities. But in Su Qin's eyes, he never thought of going overseas. Not to mention that Su Qin found the entrance to the cave world under Chang and city. Even if he didn't find it, the treasures he signed in at the imperial city were enough to promote Su Qin to the 9th heaven or even the great Arhat land immortal. In this case, why would Su Qin go overseas? At this time, the temple keeper bowed deeply to Su Qin again and said, Sir, you have saved the empire of Tang several times. If you have any needs in the future, just say it. Speaking of this, the temple keeper took out a dragon-shaped jade pendant from his arms and said, This is the token left by the founding father. Anyone who sees this token is the same as seeing the founding father. The temple keeper respectfully presented the dragon-shaped jade pendant in front of Su Qin. With this token, even if you depose the emperor, no one will dare to object. Su Qin glanced at the dragon-shaped jade pendant and said with a smile, Aren't you afraid that I will use this token to sit on the throne of the Emperor of Tang? My lord, if you want the throne, you can take it. The temple keeper replied without hesitation. Chapter 180. The guardian of the ancestral temple died of old age that night. Although Su Qin did not see it with his own eyes, he saw the guardian slowly dying with his divine sense. In fact, this was not the first time Su Qin saw someone die of old age in front of him. But every time he saw it, it gave Su Qin a different feeling. Shouyuan's limit. Su Qin sat cross-legged in the majestic underground hall, his heart filled with emotions. I wonder what level of martial artist is able to escape from the end of their lifespan? Immortality? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he thought silently. No matter what, I still have to become stronger. If I don't become stronger, I'll just live a little longer than ordinary people. Su Qin's expression turned solemn as he slowly closed his eyes, condensed the power of heaven and earth, and slowly transformed it into the micro-domain. Although for 7th heaven Arhat, condensing the micro-domain was not necessary. But for 9th heaven Arhat to go one step further and enter the realm of greater Arhat, he must transform the micro-domain into a full-fledged domain. Su Qin was currently focusing all his energy on the micro-domain. Firstly, it would be a qualitative change in his combat strength after condensing the micro-domain. Secondly, it was to pave the way for the future. Other mythical martial artists, no matter how talented they were, would not think that they would be able to ascend to the extreme and become an earth immortal. But Su Qin was different. For Su Qin, stepping into the earth immortal was just a matter of time. In the following time, Su Qin returned to his usual life. In fact, ever since Su Qin revealed his strength, there was no difference from before. The only difference was that Su Qin would occasionally take a look at the cultivation progress of the family Su people. What surprised Su Qin was that among the three family Su people, the fastest was not the brothers Su Sungho and Su Qingyu, who were at the peak of their vitality, but Su Shimin, whose vitality had begun to decline. Father has lived for most of his life, and his state of mind is not bad. That's why he was able to advance by leaps and bounds under the recovery of vitality, Su Qin secretly observed and judged in his heart. As for the two brothers, Su Sungho and Su Qingyu, they had their hearts set on the secular world. Even though they had the martial arts resources provided by Su Qin, they still had no choice but to devote themselves to cultivation. Of course, whether it was Su Shimin or Su Sungho or Su Qingyu, the reason why they could make such great progress was entirely because of the cultivation method provided by Su Qin and the fact that they cultivated under the heaven and earth great formation in the right spring square. In addition to family Su, Su Qin would occasionally give Li Wan some pointers. Third uncle. Li Wan stood there with a solemn expression on his face. How is your sword cultivation going? Su Qin casually glanced at Li Wan and said lightly. Since the last time Li Wan said that he wanted to cultivate the sword, Su Qin had divided a trace of his understanding of the sword into a sword mark and placed it on a piece of wood. It was not that Su Qin was unwilling to pass on more of his understanding of the sword to Li Wan. It was that the other party couldn't bear it at all. Sword Dao was about killing. Although the trace of understanding of the sword had been purified by Su Qin and the killing intent had long been removed, Li Wan was only a martial artist in the lower realm. Even if his martial arts aptitude was good, how could he bear the understanding of the sword of Venerable Arhat? Third uncle. I seem to have learned a little. Li Wan said cautiously. Give it a try. Su Qin looked at Li Wan and said. Li Wan nodded. She took out a wooden sword and slashed out according to the feeling she had in her heart. 1. A ray of sword light appeared and flashed, disappearing into the sky. Not bad. Su Qin saw this and nodded slightly. Although the ray of sword light that Li Wan slashed out was still not worth mentioning in his opinion, Li Wan was just a teenager. If this sword light was placed in Jianghu, it would be enough to make 90% of the swordsmen feel ashamed. With your current understanding of the sword, you can become a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster in 20 years. Su Qin commented. In the past, with Li Wan's martial arts aptitude, although stepping into Grade 1 Great Grandmaster was not a problem, it would take at least 30 years. But now, it was 10 years ahead of schedule. Third uncle. Can I really become a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster? Li Wan was full of longing. In Li Wan's view, Grade 1 Great Grandmaster was too far away from her. The particularly fierce eunuchs in the palace were only at this realm. If you want to protect the Empire of Tang, becoming a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster is not enough. Su Qin said with a deep meaning. What? Li Wan's little face suddenly became bitter. Then how strong should I be to protect the Empire of Tang? After a while, Li Wan asked tentatively. A legend. Su Qin gave a reply. Now that the vitality tide has recovered, cultivation has become easier. In the past, a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster could guard a country, but this should not happen again in the future. A peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster may still be strong, but it is absolutely impossible for them to suppress everything. Ah, a martial arts legend? Li Wan's little face was full of disappointment. If it was a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, she could still look forward to it, but a legend, at this time, Li Wan was no longer the little martial artist who had just entered the martial Dao. Although she doesn't know much about the legendary legend, she knows the difficulty of it. Don't worry with me here, I can't guarantee that you will become a legend, but at least you have more hope than others. Su Qin saw that Li Wan was full of disappointment and said casually. Third uncle, is what you said true? Li Wan blinked her big eyes. Su Qin smiled and did not reply. Instead, he took out an envelope again. This is the cultivation method you will be cultivating next. 9 in Daoist scripture? Li Wan took the paper and read the words on it. Cultivating the 9 in Daoist scripture to great accomplishment will allow you to reach Grade 1 Great Perfection, which is enough for you to cultivate for the next 100 years. Su Qin nodded. Although Li Wan is expected to become a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster in 20 years, even if everything goes well, it will be 100 years before she is ready to break through to the Legend Realm. And this is with the influence of the recovery of the world's essence Qi tide. Otherwise, without the world's essence Qi tide, Li Wan will not be able to grasp the world's essence Qi for the rest of her life, let alone break through to the Legend Realm. Let's go back. Su Qin talked to Li Wan about the key points of cultivating the 9 in Daoist scripture, and let Li Wan go back and slowly ponder it. Su Qin can certainly play a guiding role in martial Dao cultivation, but it depends more on the martial artists themselves. I hope a few of you can become legends. After Li Wan left, Su Qin's expression became indifferent and calm again. Just as Su Qin was about to return to the underground palace under Chang and city to continue condensing the miniature domain. Su Qin seemed to suddenly feel something, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he looked in a certain direction. Chapter 181. Another martial arts legend has been born? Su Qin's eyes were deep, as if there was an inexplicable vortex slowly rotating, illuminating the 9 heavens and the netherworld. At this moment, Su Qin was already Arhat's 7th heaven. With the eye of truth and the celestial divination technique, he could see through the empire of Tang at a glance. As for the outside of the empire of Tang, although it was beyond Su Qin's control, he could vaguely sense it. And just now, Su Qin vaguely noticed that a trace of a martial arts legend's aura suddenly flashed and disappeared at the edge of the continent. That's not right. The aura is stable. It's not a new martial arts legend. It should be a martial arts legend who returned from overseas. Su Qin carefully sensed for a moment and thought to himself. Overseas? Su Qin's brows furrowed slightly, but then relaxed. Even if the overseas martial arts legend really returned, Su Qin would be too lazy to intervene if he did his job and hid in a corner. But if the other party wanted to cause havoc in the world, or simply provoke Su Qin had no choice but to kill them. At the same time, in the Longevity Hall, Emperor Li Sheng sat on the dragon throne, looked at the Minister of Rights below, and said, "If you have something to say, say it." "As you wish." The Minister of Rights bowed and said, "Your Majesty, now many small countries have submitted letters of surrender, but..." At this point, the Minister of Rights stopped and did not dare to continue. Ever since Su Qin killed the Meng Yuan Empire's imperial teacher outside Chang and city and burned the 5 million troops, the world was shaken and the countries were terrified. As a result, during this period of time, small countries have successively submitted letters of surrender. This naturally made the Emperor of Tang overjoyed. "But what?" the Emperor of Tang asked. The Minister of Rights said cautiously, "But the 6 countries, Nanming, Northern Song, and Tibet, have put forward conditions." "What conditions?" Emperor Li Sheng was not surprised when he heard this and asked. Among all the countries, only these 6 countries could truly be called great countries. In addition, the Empire of Tang in the past. The 7 nations stood side by side, facing each other, and together, they divided more than half of the world's territory. As for the other small countries, they might disappear after a while. The Emperor of Tang didn't care about them at all. The 6 countries did not submit letters of surrender like the other small countries. Instead, they proposed conditions. This was also within the Emperor of Tang's expectations. After all, as the monarch of a large country, even if he surrendered, he still needed the Emperor of Tang to appease him. As for the Emperor of Tang, as long as the 6 monarchs obediently surrendered and did not obstruct him, the Emperor of Tang would agree to most of the conditions. The 6 kingdoms want a promise. Even if the Empire of Tang rules the world in the future, the descendants of the 6 kingdoms will be able to enjoy wealth forever. If the descendants of the 6 nations are in trouble, I hope that the Empire of Tang can help them. The Minister of Rights cupped his hands and said. And I was wondering what the conditions were. Hearing this, the Emperor of Tang smiled. Enjoy wealth forever? Help them? I've already agreed. If the Empire of Tang really ruled the world, it would be too easy to raise the descendants of the 6 nations. As for the difficulties, as long as the Empire of Tang spoke, who would dare to make things difficult for the descendants of the Six Nations. Your Majesty, the Minister of Rights braced himself and said, the promise that the Six Nations want is not Your Majesty's promise, not my promise? The Emperor of Tang frowned, not knowing what the Minister of Rights was talking about. The Minister of Rights calmed himself down and continued, the promise that the Six Nations want is the Imperial Uncle's promise. When the Minister of Rights said the words Imperial Uncle, his voice trembled as if he was in awe of something. They want the third brother's promise? The Emperor of Tang suddenly stood up and paced back and forth. After a while, a sneer appeared on Emperor Li Sheng's face. These 6 countries have a good plan. In a flash, the Emperor of Tang understood the Six Nations plan. Simply put, the kings of the Six Nations did not believe in the Emperor of Tang's promise. As kings, they knew each other's thoughts too well. Perhaps the Emperor of Tang had promised today that after he truly controlled the territories of the Six Nations, he would find a random reason to kill the descendants of the Six Nations. But if this promise was given by Su Qin, then it would be different. No matter who became the Emperor of Tang in the future, as long as Su Qin was still alive, the Emperor of Tang would not dare to go against Su Qin. One sentence from Su Qin was enough to let the descendants of the Six Nations live a comfortable life for the next few hundred years without having to worry about any danger. I understand. The Emperor of Tang thought for a while and sat back on the throne. You may leave. As you wish. The Minister of Rights bowed. After the Minister of Rights left, the Emperor of Tang went to the Eastern Palace alone. The Emperor of Tang had just entered the Eastern Palace when he felt warm all over. He felt even more comfortable after taking a deep breath. Third brother's methods are truly unfathomable. The Emperor of Tang's face was filled with emotion. He had lived in the Eastern Palace for a few years and naturally knew what the Eastern Palace was like. But under Su Qin's methods, the originally featureless Eastern Palace was transformed into a paradise on Earth. It was simply inconceivable. When Yuan ascends the throne, I want to live here with Yun all year round. The Emperor of Tang made up his mind. If he was not worried about the Empire of Tang, he would have stayed in the Eastern Palace all day long. Because some time ago, the Emperor of Tang discovered that Su Shimin, who had begun to age, had grown black hair again. Soon, the Emperor of Tang stopped in front of the Right Spring Square. Now, the heaven and earth formation in the Right Spring Square had spread to cover the entire Eastern Palace. The family Su had found a place to cultivate in the Eastern Palace. As for the Right Spring Square, as Su Qin's former residence, no one dared to treat this place as their own. Third brother. The Emperor of Tang cupped his hands at the Right Spring Square and said in a low voice. The next moment, a faint voice sounded. You're looking for me? Su Qin had appeared beside him at some point and looked at the Emperor of Tang. Third brother. Emperor Li Sheng's spirit shook, and he immediately stated the conditions of the 6 countries truthfully. You want my promise? Su Qin laughed. It seems that the 6 nations still don't know what their situation is. Su Qin did not expect that the 6 nations would be so courageous as to make conditions to a martial arts legend. Third brother, what should we do now? The Emperor of Tang asked. Should I summon the army and attack the 6 nations? No need to go through so much trouble. Su Qin shook his head. With a thought, 6 tokens flew out of the Right Spring Square. Send people to the 6 nations and give them 2 choices. Su Qin paused for a moment and continued, submit or die. Submit or die. Or die. The Emperor of Tang heard this and felt his heart tremble. Third brother, will the 6 nations agree? The Emperor of Tang asked in a worried tone. If the 6 nations did not take the initiative to cooperate, it would take at least decades for the Empire of Tang to unify the world. Agree? Su Qin handed the 6 tokens to the Emperor of Tang and said, if they don't agree, just take out the tokens. The Emperor of Tang took the tokens. The 6 tokens added up to less than half a pound, but they seemed to weigh more than 1,000 pounds in his hand. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.